Santa Clarita Library. Oh, thank you. Okay, we're recording. I want to do a shout out to the Santa Clarita Library. That's where I am right now, and I am in their talk box booth for this Zoom call. They were very gracious to help set me up and get me accommodated in a booth that has air conditioning and lighting and plugs for everything. So I'm very appreciative because I'll be visiting with friends that are in this area tonight. All right. So people, I'm sure, will continue to join us, but I do want to jump right in. So we'll go on to the next slide, which I'm going to talk not only about LA Forward, but I'm going to talk about my journey on how I found LA Forward and my experience so far. So some of you may know my personal story is I lost my father. Oh, yes, and I will introduce myself. My name is Tressa Pope. I am a volunteer with LA Forward, and I'm also a paying member. And I, at one point, volunteered to help lead up the Housing Justice Working Group. And so I'll tell you why I did that and what kind of led to that. So in 2023, my family lost my biological father, and that was primarily due to the effects of him being unhoused and kind of a mental spiral after his eviction went bad, and he was in another state, so it was really hard to get him the assistance that he needed. And so after his passing, a lot of us deal with grief in different ways, and mine was I wanted to honor him in some way by helping with the housing, housing crisis or homelessness, and if I could impact other families by not having to go through the same thing, or have some relief in some way, that would be my way to honor my dad. And so as I was kind of searching for ways to educate myself and organizations to plug into, I stumbled across LA Forward, and they were running an academy at that time. So I applied and got introduced to how local government works and local campaigns and who my local representatives were and what issues were important to those representatives and unfortunately what issues were not important to them. And so it really gave me that foundational education on kind of how everything works in our local city and county. And so that's what I really like about this statement here on the screen, that LA Forward seeks to make local government and issues accessible to a wider public and awaken people to their own power to act in solidarity with communities most impacted by racial and economic justice. And so that really resonated with me in terms of getting having a resource for education. So if I don't know something, LA Forward is part of many coalitions that if LA Forward themselves don't have the resources, they introduce us to other organizations that do. And then there's plenty of people within LA Forward that are also an individual resource as well. Next slide. So we're going to go into tonight's agenda, and then I'll briefly tell you who's leading us through tonight's agenda. So myself, Tressa Pope, and then Godfrey is here with us. He'll introduce himself during his section, and then Jason will introduce himself during his section as well. But we are going to have some interactive time to talk about what our local housing crisis is. We'll go over the 3 Ps of housing, tensions and challenges, next steps, and then be sure to note in your questions as we be sure to notate your questions as we go through the slides so that during the Q&A time, we can make sure we get your answers, your questions answered. All right, next slide. So this is the interactive part. So in the chat box, I want you to share what evidence do we see that there is a housing crisis in LA. It could be something we see, we feel, we experience, or others experience within Los Angeles that you notice is causing a housing crisis in Los Angeles. So you can share things that maybe have happened to you personally. Yes, I agree, high rent, number of unhoused, increasing unhoused people, high rents, high rents, high home prices. I think that there's a lack of, yeah, people having to drive also to further jobs, like far away, moving out of the city, they can't afford to live here. People have jobs I know somebody that drives like 2 hours from I think Riverside into Los Angeles for work. Um, so I don't know how he sees his family. Rent is higher than income, a lot of displacement, new housing just leads to gentrification. Yeah. And there's a lot of like cross sections as well, transportation with housing and climate with housing, which we have a teach-in on that coming up as well. This is great. All right, let's look at our next slide. So in the chat box, let's hear your guesses. And if you're a 4 or 5, you should not be participating in this guess. But how many units of housing do we need in order to combat that housing crisis? So just in the city of Los Angeles, guess how many units we would need to get everyone housed. 5 million. Wow. 100K, tens of thousands, 450. All right. If we were playing Price is Right, I think Eric would get it. All right, let's look at the next slide. All right, so I'm going to kind of fast forward to the end of the question, but also walk you through this slide. But on the far right at the very bottom where it says total units, that's 456,000. So that's almost a 500,000 units just in the city of Los Angeles. So that's not the county as a whole, that's just the city of Los Angeles. How many units we would need? I saw this. Oh, okay. So Eric had a little bit of a heads up on that. How much That's much housing we would need in order to have all of these income levels housed. And so on the right side of the screen, what you're seeing are different um, income levels, and the AMI stands for area median income. So I'm going to do just kind of some basic math right here just to explain this concept. If the area median income, meaning the average income in a certain area, was, let's say, for one person, $100,000, half of $100,000 would be $50,000. So if you're looking at the very low income line on this chart, whatever the income level is, and we'll go into a little bit later, but the area median income that's determined by the government entity, whether that be the county or the state, these different levels where it's 50% or less, that's very low. Then we have low income, moderate, and these designations help, whether it be agencies, legislation, determine how much housing is needed for these particular income groups. So these studies have been done to determine this is how much housing that we need in order to keep all of these individuals housed at all these different income levels. And so you may hear, when you're working in housing advocacy, you may be on a call with maybe an agency or some kind of city or county representative where they're talking about mixed income buildings. So what they're talking about are these different low, moderate, very low income levels, or even above moderate income, which would be over 120%, and in some cases, 100 over 150%, is what they're designating their target residents for that particular building or structure. So next slide. So this slide kind of expands on that a little bit more. So like the example I gave, one person, average median income for the area. I was pretty close on this, if it was about, so where it says 50% very low income, one person making $53,000, that is half of the area median income for Los Angeles County. And so they also have designations for how many people will be living in the household, and that could be minors, so that could be dependents that are children. It could also be dependents that are seniors. It could be extended family. So if you had a 8-person household, all 8 people are living in one household, and collectively the household is earning $100,000, that's considered very low income. So these types of charts not only determine how housing is built, but it also determines what services people uh, may be able to have access to. So that could be even homelessness services or affordable housing subsidies or some kind of help that they're getting. Um, this chart determines where people um, fall. So if they have certain programs where they say this program is designated for 50% AMI or less, they look at this chart and the person's, maybe they have to send in their pay stubs or something, and that determines what kind of services and what kind of access they would get to certain housing. Um, all right, so I think that's what I'm covering. Hopefully you noted down any of the questions that you might have, and then I think I'm passing the baton to Godfrey.
Thanks so much, Tressa. Again, I
Mhm.
want to highlight and thank Tressa for leading us tonight. This is the usual time for LA Forward Institute's Housing Justice Working Group, which meets weekly here on Zoom on a different Zoom, not this one, but this week, Tressa thought it'd be great to make sure folks have the opportunity to catch up sort of to just all this housing language. And even on this slide that Tressa is ending on, you all can see it's so easy for us to use words like affordable housing, low income, and we feel like we have definitions for those, but these are policy definitions and how things are defined elsewhere by entities that then govern the practice of getting housed and housing. And so that is part of the reason why we're having this conversation tonight, because we want people to get access to the language that is governing why we're fighting for housing for all. So thank you,
Yeah,
Tressa, for getting
yeah,
started
and
there. Yeah.
I'll jump in real quick. Just one last thing is, and I forgot to mention this, but that was one of the things for myself where I found that was kind of a barrier where I was afraid to um, participate in advocacy because I didn't feel like I knew enough of the terms. But now I just find myself, if asking a question, if I'm in a group and they're talking about a term I don't know, I say I don't know, and that's because the people that are impacted by the housing crisis are essentially all of us. And so we should be educating however many people we can so that we all know how to talk to those that we elect in order to get what's fair and equitable for all of us in terms of housing. So don't be afraid to come to our working group, ask whatever questions you have, because that's how we help impact our communities.
Thanks, Tressa.
Mhm.
For folks who I don't know, my name is Godfrey Plata. My pronouns are he, him, his. I get to be the deputy director at LA Ford Institute, meaning I support all of our organizing and programming. And this is just one of the many issues that our community members work on across LA City and LA County. I myself am a renter in Koreatown. I get to live in rent stabilized housing, which I'm so grateful for because it means that I can predict how much money I can budget to keep myself housed, which of course frees up so much other possibility for how I think about the rest of my life. We're going to continue our vocabulary lesson today because you're here for alphabet soup, ABCs of housing. And we're actually going to really harp on the letter P. The reason why we're going to harp on the letter P is because Tressa shared with you an exact problem that we are facing. We are clearly facing a housing crisis that each of us noticed in the chat box. We talked about in the chat box. It's also a quantifiable housing crisis, as well as you saw in the almost 500,000 units across income brackets that we actually are missing in LA City, stated by the city itself and submitted that to the state. And so the sets of solutions that we have to this housing crisis, to the exact challenge we talked about, are sort of governed by these three Ps. There's lots of solutions under these three Ps. We're going to stay at a really surface level today, just to make sure we're getting our bearings, because this is a 101 of housing. And then after I share a little bit about each of these three Ps and the solutions underneath each one, my colleague Jason is going to start talking about the tensions between the three Ps because it's not all easy peasy. And there are challenges just inherent in getting the three Ps implemented as well. So we're going to start at a place of comprehension, and then we're going to start looking at the challenges. Cool. Um, so a couple of things. We're going to start first with the first P that you see on your screen, which is production. Production is exactly what it sounds like. It's producing new housing, and in this case, affordable housing. One of the words, again, we're going to be super basic right now, but just so we know what we're talking about. one of the words we often think about when we think about the production of new housing in anywhere, LA City, LA County, or anywhere, is the word zoning comes up. The word zoning comes up because we want to be able to talk about where can you build what. And we've created cities, counties, just geographies in general, in which we zone certain places in our community to be able to only build certain things in that particular zone. I'm going to give folks an example. Perhaps one of the most widely used ways that we talk about zoning is we start talking about something called single family zoned areas. You see on your screen a map that you can actually access and zoom into in real time on the controller's website. The controller, Kenneth Mejia of Los Angeles, created a map, put it up on the internet where you can zoom in to see whether or not you live in a single family zoned area. A single family zoned area is exactly what that sounds like. That in that area, buildings that are allowed to be built in those particular areas are meant for one family on a lot of land in that particular zoned area. One of the problems in LA, as we continue to try to figure out where 500,000 units are going to go, is everywhere that you see that is pink on this map is a single family zoned area, meaning that unless you're trying to house just one family per lot, you can't actually build more housing there. And so there have been moves over the last many years to challenge the idea that we should maintain our zoning patterns in this way. This is where these other terms begin to come up. When you hear the term upzoning, it's literally about allowing the zoning there to make things more dense, meaning more people can live there. We're going to build up, not even necessarily build up in a height perspective, but allow to build more than just for a single family zoned area. So even adding the opportunity for ADUs or to create just a few more units on a single lot of land that is single family instead of keeping it single family, that's upzoning. Downzoning is a reverse. Downzoning is making sure that you're actually lowering the number of people or units that are able to be built in a particular area. Upzoning, downzoning. And as we're talking about upzoning and downzoning, you're modifying the density of how many people can share a space. Density. Another a term that frequently gets used as we're talking about this is transit-oriented corridor. Um, a lot of density, more and more through state law, through local law, has been incentivized on transit-oriented corridors or zones, meaning where there's a lot of public transit, like rapid buses, metros, etc. Because of the availability of public transit in those areas, an argument has been made around increasing density near transit-oriented corridors. So you get, so that's where that term comes from. It's just referring to a particular place in the area. So these are words that often come up when we talk about affordable housing production or building new housing, or where we can't build housing based on our current system of zoning. The other thing that comes up here is this is expensive. If we're supposed to be building all of these different units, where is this money coming from? And so we're going to focus for a moment, like at a very high level, on these two really important measures that LA City and LA County voters have passed in the last few years. One is Measure ULA, more alphabet, and Measure A, more alphabet. The reason why these local measures got put on the ballot by a lot of local or housing justice organizations and movements is because when you take a look at the state level, you see here a pie chart. This pie chart is meant to represent the amount of money that the state budgets for everything. And you can see this is a slide we've taken from our coalition friends at Housing Now. You can see that at the state level, we actually devote very little money to housing and homelessness. And because at the state level, we're not budgeting for this type of work to happen, we have to think at the local level about where we're going to get these funds from to create housing. And so 2 years ago, we passed something as voters called Measure A. Measure A is a sales tax on some items in the county, and basically the funds from that revenue serve to fund the things that you see on your screen. And so, because this is county level, you'll see that some of the money goes straight to LA County, the government of LA County. And so there's, half of that is for homeless services, 9% of that is for local solutions, meaning things that are really about a local issue, solving particular issues in just one part of the county. There's 88 cities in LA County, and more than 1 million people live in what's called unincorporated LA County, meaning that they're not even governed by a city. The only funds they have access to are actually from the county. And so these are the local solutions funds are meant to fund particular projects or initiatives in just specific parts of the county. And then in the middle of the screen, you see something that says LACAHSA. LACAHSA stands for something. It's an agency. It's the LA County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, LACAHSA. This is different from LAHSA, which some people hear about on the news, which is LA Homelessness Services Agency, which actually is going through some changes. This is LACAHSA, doesn't work on homelessness services. Instead, La Casa is about affordable housing production and preservation, which we're going to get to momentarily. They're also about homelessness prevention, which is another P that we're going to get to momentarily, which is about keeping people housed. So you can see that the monies from Measure A go through this particular agency in order to distribute those funds and create housing all over the county. This is still pretty limited. It's only about $1 billion a year or so, which only goes so far, right? Which is why there's also an LA City measure that folks have passed called Measure ULA. Measure A is LA County only. Measure ULA is LA City only. And remember, LA City, even though it's 4 million people, is only 40% of LA County, which is 10 million people. Measure ULA is a transfer tax, meaning a transfer tax is when a property is transferring hands, right? If I buy a property, it is transferring to me. So this is not a sales tax like Measure A. This is only on property transfers. And in particular, Measure ULA only applies to property transfers at which the cost of the property is $5 million or up. So if I bought a $5 million house, that is a property transfer that applies to Measure ULA. And that's probably not most of us. This also applies to things beyond residential as well. It applies to like commercial buildings, et cetera. Any properties that are $5 million and up. And the $1 billion or so that has been raised from this also go to very similar things: affordable housing production, preservation, and homelessness prevention, specifically for the city of LA. So with Measure ULA and Measure A, this together creates billions of dollars of revenue for us to be able to support um, the figuring out our housing problem here in LA. Again, this is like primarily we're talking about production. Part of the theory of production is that we actually do need more housing, more units to be able to house everybody across all income levels. Now, what we're going to do is focus in on a second P, so away from production. We're no longer going to be talking about building new housing. We're going to talk about protecting those who are already housed in this particular P. This is where we talk about tenant stuff and rent stuff. So you can see a selection of different policies on the screen. And these are various phrases you might hear as you think about renter protections. This certainly isn't comprehensive. I know there are at least a few folks in this room who are very expert on renter protections in the area. But again, staying at a really 101 level, one of the things you can think about is how much your rent can increase. And how much your rent can increase depends on whether or not you're in a rent stabilized home and whether and how old your particular home is. Also tells us whether or not there can be caps placed on it. So that's like one area of rent protections that we can talk about, and rent control and stabilization are often used as words to talk about specific units through which caps can be applied to those particular rents. So um, there's a distinction between rent control and rent stabilization. If you think about, like, so I'm in a rent stabilized unit. Um, when I leave my unit in Koreatown, if I ever do, when I leave that, the law currently says that the property manager, whoever owns my particular building, they can then raise that rent to market value at that or market rate at that particular point, or they can even raise it above market rate if they wanted to. But me being there, I benefit from rent stabilization, right? It's the building is rent stabilized, so when I move in, I start at a certain rate and it maintains a certain rate. But when somebody else moves in, that rate no longer, my rate doesn't exist for them anymore. Um, if if we made it so that a particular unit stayed at the same cost no matter who was in it, that moves from stabilization to control. So oftentimes we mix these things up, but there are different concepts. Does it stay stabilized based on the person and how long they stay there from entry to end? Or is the unit itself maintaining the price regardless of who's in it? Those are two different things. Other things we talk about in renter protections include right to counsel. So too many evictions occur because people just don't know what their rights are. And so a right to counsel has been passed as an ordinance in the city of LA, which means that if I get an eviction notice, I have a right to an attorney to help me figure out what's happening there. And perhaps that interaction in of itself ensures that I have adequate defense against the eviction and I have an understanding of all of my rights. Um, and then, of course, there is eviction prevention as well. There are some policies that exist in the city of LA and the county where folks who might experience disabilities or folks of a certain age have access to some subsidies because they may no longer work, for example. And then another sort of word out there is tenant anti-harassment ordinance, or TAHO, is sometimes what people will say. And this is because if there is still the incentive for landlords or property managers to get as much value from their unit as much as possible, too many tenants get harassed to try to get them to leave. Um, and that's not cool. And so Tahoe exists to be able to protect tenants from that type of harassment, just so their landlords and property owners can benefit from their departure. Someone said this earlier in the chat box when we asked, like, how do you know that there's a housing crisis? Where, well, incomes haven't really kept up at all with rent prices, right? And so, in particular, for these reasons, it becomes really important to recognize how hard it is to just live and survive and be housed. And this is why it's been important to also have this segment of protections for current tenants, not just building new housing as a solution. Later on, again, my colleague Jason will walk through the tensions between the P's, because you can imagine that there's a tension there where there's a focus or energy around protecting renters, and there's a focus or energy around building new buildings. Earlier, in the chat box, people talked about displacement, for example, and so like there's some give and take tension between increasing units on a particular space. What happens to the displaced residents? That type of thing, right? So these things are in tension with each other. And again, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Let's talk about the last P here. And we're only going to, like, again, really live at the surface level here. But again, production is the building of new housing. Protection is the protection of those who are currently housed. And then preservation is about preserving our stock of affordable housing that currently exists, right? We know that there is already some affordable housing, but one thing most people know is that those things are on a ticking clock. Affordability is a ticking clock. Right now, in the way in which we structure what affordable housing means here in LA, but also outside of LA, there are covenants applied to each apartment building. Let's say I live in an apartment building. Let's say it's affordable housing. That affordability covenant may expire after 30 years, 55 years, or 99 years. So let's say I come from a working class family and I've lived in my same apartment for 29 years. Then it's 30 years, and then the affordability expires. That landlord, that property manager, no longer has to honor the fact that my unit that has been affordable for 30 years has to maintain affordable per my income bracket. And affordability, again, just depends on your income bracket, et cetera. And in general, we're looking at a rent burden being anything that requires you to pay more than 30% of your income, right? When we talk about affordability, we're talking about only paying at the most 30% of your income if you are one person. So because these currently expire, there is a move in the preservation space called permanent affordability. Permanent affordability literally means that. It means like, why do we let these expire? If we believe in housing for all and generational change, then the unit that I'm in like ought to be affordable forever for me. And in particular, this permanent affordability idea has looped in with this idea called social housing. We're going to have a whole separate teach-in on social housing in about a month or so. Same thing for the state of rent control and rent stabilization. We're going to go more deeply into these in the upcoming weeks. But for today, all you need to know is that this idea of social housing is one in which we're beginning to perpetuate this idea in LA City and LA County. There's beginning to be funding available for this type of housing through Measure ULA funds, Measure A funds. And in this idea of social housing, there are two really big parts of what makes it social housing. One is this is permanently affordable housing, not affordability that expires after 30 years, 55 years, 99 years. So social housing in how we're trying to build it in LA City and LA County is permanently affordable. The second part of this that is really important is that there's a pathway toward tenant governance. Right now, in my apartment complex, I don't govern my apartment complex. I have a property manager who tells me everything about who, like, who's in charge of my entire building. Tenant governance displaces the idea of corporate governance, and allows tenants to actually begin to be the ones who get a say around their place where they live. So again, social housing might sound a little like theoretical, and we will have a deeper dive in a couple of weeks, but this exists elsewhere in the world. It exists in places like Vienna, Austria, and Singapore and Uruguay. There are these types of co-op models in New York City, for example, and we're just a little bit behind the times here in LA. And so a lot of folks are trying to bring in this idea of social housing so that we don't have affordability that expires and tenants get more say in their housing moving forward, as opposed to simply corporate property owners and managers running our lives and then creating a monopoly in our cities. Anyway, so those are the three P's. I just want to go back to the three P's. Those are the three P's. These are all very different buckets of solutions to solve our housing crisis, which again is 500,000 units that we've got to produce or protect or preserve by the end of the decade. I'm going to pass things to my colleague Jason to talk a little bit about some of the tensions that exist with these three Ps, because again, it's not all easy peasy. It's not all just like, well, let's just do that. Jason?
Everybody, my name is Jason Enright. I work at LA Forward as an organizer. It's likely that maybe if you're here, you got a text from me this week inviting you here. That's the sort of work I do. I try to build our people power. And then I support our people as we go to City Hall to advocate for things, or we meet with elected officials to advocate for things. I started with as a volunteer at LA Ford years ago, just like this on a Zoom for the first time, learning about things. And now I get to share some of what I've learned with all of you, and that's a great part of all of this. I hope that someday in the future you'll be teaching other people about housing with what you learned here tonight. Um, so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tensions here. This is where things get a little bit more political. We're going to talk about some of the tensions between the three Ps, and we're going to talk about some of the groups you may have heard about that are out there. And I just want to say, like, I hope that if you are part of one of these groups, none of this is, I'm going to try not to say anything that puts down any one group or anything like that. I think there are a lot of really valid opinions out there about this. And this is a very complicated issue. Um, but I think where it really comes down to is that over the last, 40, 50 years, we just haven't built the right type of housing. We haven't built enough housing, and we haven't protected the people in housing um, who need it. And so we're hoping to change that. And I think that hopefully these different groups that might have slightly different opinions about how we do that can come together to help everyone get housed. It's my firm belief that housing is a human right, and I think that we should all be working together to make sure that everyone has access to housing. Um, so let's talk about some of these tensions, right? A lot of them come down to basically which of the three P's you think is most important, right? You know, uh, Sadly, right now, a lot of our housing is built by private developers, right? When you hear that the city has to build $450,000, doesn't mean the city is hiring construction workers to go and build that. The city might be helping provide some land in some cases, but really what we're talking about is that private developers are getting loans from banks and they're going out and hiring people to build housing. And then when that housing is finished building, they expect to be able to either sell that building for a profit or rent out each individual unit in that building for a profit, right? And so the tensions in a lot of this come from the fact that we're living in a for-profit system and that we have to balance sort of how much we need to build versus keeping the people building it happy, right? Um, so first among the tensions is interim versus permanent housing. And this kind of has to do a little bit more with homelessness, which we're not talking as much about tonight. We're talking more just about the housing issue itself. But you may hear sometimes, so I just want to cover this really quick. You may hear on the news like Mayor Bass approves X number of units of more interim housing or approves X number of units more permanent housing. Basically, what that means is interim housing is like shelter beds or maybe like hotel rooms for people. They're short-term housing meant to get someone off the street so they have some time to, maybe take care of themselves and find a job and eventually move into permanent housing. Permanent housing is what hopefully we all live in, right? It's rental units, it's homes, it's something that will exist again next year. It's not like a temporary thing. So if you hear those terms, interim versus permanent, you might hear lately if they're talking about Measure ULA, which Godfrey mentioned earlier, like should the money be used for interim versus permanent housing? And that's basically saying should it be used to build more apartment buildings or should it be used to build more shelters? Um, and one of the tensions there is that if all you build is interim housing, eventually you expect people to move out of that housing. But if we don't have permanent housing for them to move into, then they might end up back on the street. Um, then you might hear protection versus production. Um, I don't know if any of you have ever heard the term like NIMBY or the term YIMBY. NIMBY means not in my backyard. And the idea is that there are some people who, when a big apartment building is suggested to be built in their neighborhood, they go out to their neighborhood council or they go out to city council and they say, I don't want that being built in my neighborhood. Build it somewhere else. A lot of studies have shown that people are very supportive of new housing as long as it's not where they live, right? And so there are people who are trying to counter that NIMBY movement that they call themselves YIMBYs, or you might hear them referred to as being for abundant housing. You might have heard like a group like Abundant Housing LA. And those people really value production, right? They think that like the best way to drive down prices is to build a lot, a lot, a lot. And eventually, if we build enough, it'll start to, supply versus demand, it'll start to drive down prices. However, sometimes you might hear them say things like, well, if we make the rent control too strict, that's going to hurt production. Why would people want to build if they can't make a profit off of what they've built? And so there can be tension there sometimes. When we were working on the rent control motion last year, we heard from people a lot. We heard from people sometimes like, if you go too strict on this, it's going to hurt production. And so we had to, there sometimes you have to find a balance, right? You have to figure that out. That's, hopefully the production and the protection people can talk to each other and find a balance. Because I think in the end, they all want people housed, right? And so, like, you might hear the different sides there. You might hear like of the NIMBYs, the YIMBYs, and then you might hear people who are asking, for something like protection. They want to keep people housed, right? And then you also hear sometimes preservation versus production. There was a bill last year suggesting that we build more along transit corridors. Great idea, right? Public transit is we have these public transit areas. It's a good idea to build near them so people can access the public transit. That helps people get to their jobs and things like that. Great idea. But then some people pointed out, like, hey, some of these areas you want to build in a few parts of town are going to kill like rent control buildings, right? You're gonna replace rent control buildings. So can we get a few protections or some preservation clauses in this bill so that we don't replace important RSO buildings? And there was some tension there between the preservation and the production people. The production people were like, no, if you add too much to this bill, it might kill it. They were worried about that. So again, we had tensions back and forth. We had to work that out. Luckily, that bill, they made a few amendments. It passed. It's now law. It's called SB 79. We're going to talk about it in depth in a couple weeks on one of these Zooms. But yeah, so there can be tensions between preservation and production. Also, sometimes you hear about tensions between environmentalism and production, right? I don't know if any of you have heard this term CEQA on the news, CEQA. Basically, whenever you build, somebody can put in the chat what it stands for. I can't tell you honestly. It's something Environmental Quality Act or something. But CEQA, it basically is when you're building a new building, you have to go through certain review processes to make sure, like, you're not building on a toxic waste dump site, or you're not building too close to a power plant or something that's polluting. But sometimes people can use the CEQA process to capture a new building project and kill it. Sometimes people will go sometimes people will like go and use the CEQA process just because they don't want the building built. They don't actually care about making sure the building's built safely. They just go out and they're trying to kill it, right? Because they don't want the building in their neighborhood. And so lately there's been some efforts to reform CEQA and to make sure that we're still protecting the environment, but we're not allowing this environmental process to get captured. So sometimes you'll hear like, you may have heard of a book that was really popular last year called Abundance by a writer named Ezra Klein. And he talked about how in some places there were just this really bad capture using the environmental movement to capture and kill production. But I think again, it's not about like we shouldn't get rid of CEQA altogether. CEQA at least had a good idea to protect people, but we need to figure out how it's being misused and how to use it properly. You want to go to the next slide, Godfrey? So we talked about this, right? Who is the ones actually building housing in LA, right? So currently in Los Angeles, 84% of multifamily housing is created by for-profit organizations. And I think a lot of the tensions we talked about on production come from because what you'll hear a lot, like if you get into this work, is you'll hear people saying, well, if we pass this new law to protect people, or we pass this new preservation law, it's going to make it so hard for builders to build that they'll just stop. They'll leave LA or they'll leave California, and it'll kill all building in LA, right? And I think in my mind, one of the solutions for that is why are we so dependent on for-profit organizations to build everything? If we created something like to fund housing ourselves and we started building more housing ourselves, then we wouldn't be so reliant on these for-profit organizations, and we could build the kind of housing we want, where we want it, without for the prices we want it, without having to worry so much about the for-profit people. But as long as we have this system where we're dependent so much on for-profit people, I think there's always going to be these tensions between the three Ps and between environmentalism. And it's up to us to really like not just go to our corners and say like I'm 100% production or I'm 100% preservation or 100% protection, but to work together and figure this out all together. Yeah, so we were going to do a little game, but I'm worried we're running out of time. So we're going to move on, I think. Uh, let's see here. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about some potential things that stall out what's going on here, right? Um, when you start to build something, you need to get approvals. You need to see is it properly zoned? Is there you have to go through the whole CEQA process. Is it built too close to something dangerous? You have to figure out your funding to build something that can slow things down as well. A lot of times, like say the interest rate change crazily, or say all of a sudden there's now tariffs on wood or concrete or the building materials you need. That might change your funding for your project, and a project that had been, planned to go into production stalls all of a sudden. There's site considerations. When I was on the neighborhood council, we'd have to all this time to approve like letters of recommendation for buildings, and we'd have to look over how close they're going to build to the curb. Is there enough parking for in the area for that? How many parking spots are they going to attach to the unit? There's all sorts of things like that, right? And then there's the community decision makers, right? Sometimes a building can get announced. We had the mayor pass this executive directive a year ago to build a lot more affordable housing, and then there was massive pushback by certain parts of the community, and so she weakened that thing that was meant to speed up housing production of affordable units. And so, we need to figure out how we're going to counteract those forces and get, support for the type of housing we want to see built. So these are all things that can slow down or stall or completely kill housing. Can we go to the next slide? So like we were talking about, challenges. Is it possible to please everyone, right? When you're building something, you have to think about who are the decision makers at the county and the city. Who are their staff? Who are the community members involved? What special groups are there? Maybe this is a historical district and you have to, take care of that. Maybe there's a school nearby and that affects things. You have to think about who owns the land that you want to build on, right? All of these things can come into play as different challenges as well. And let's move on. So we were going to play this game. We'll come back to it in a minute. Let's talk real quick before we run out of time. With all this information we gave you, right? What can you do from here? If you want to learn more, we're going to be offering more teach-ins next week at this time. And I believe you can already sign up on our website at la4.org/calendar. We're doing a teach-in about like climate and housing, and the crossovers there. We're going to talk about something called infill building, and we're going to talk about electrification. We also have another teach-in coming up after that that's going to be all about rent control. If you don't know, last year we won a big rent control fight, and there's more rent control fights coming up. And we're going to have more teach-ins coming after that. We also have a housing working group. If you want to get involved in actually working with us on certain bills or motions at City Hall, that's what our working group does. Our working group also does research actions where we go and we try to set meetings with the people who are experts in these things and learn from them and learn how we can come up with solutions for things. We're also part of a lot of coalitions. Last year, I was happy to work with the Keep LA Housed Coalition. that works on like renter protections and preservation. There's also we're part of like ACT LA, United to House LA, Housing Now. There's all sorts of different groups of people who work on this stuff that we're a part of, and that you can be a part of if you get more involved in LA Forward. And then there's all the ways we take action, right? We send emails, we make phone calls, we make comment, we meet directly with elected representatives and their staffs. We teach each other, we lead campaigns, and most importantly, this year we have a lot of opportunities. Half the city council and the mayor are up for election. And if the people in power aren't building and doing the kind of housing that we need to move the city forward, we can elect new people. So those are all ways we can get involved. I believe now we're going to take a few questions. Oh, sorry. First opportunities. Start putting your questions in the chat or raise your hand. Just real quick, you have the upcoming learning series, February 12th. Although is this backwards? I think this slide might be backwards. But yeah, we have new teach-ins coming up. We're going to talk about electrification. We're going to talk about rent control. We also have other groups that work on similar things. We have an immigrant justice group. They're going to be learning all about HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, and new rules from HUD that are going to affect mixed status households, like mixed immigration status. We also have an LA Forward monthly meeting coming up where you can learn about what the organization is doing as a whole. Yeah, so that is that. Are there any questions? Let's see. I see one here. Who are the not-for-profit groups that build housing?
I would, that's a great question. I would, if you want to Google, check out SCAMP. It stands for Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. And so they are actually the association of all of those groups that you're thinking about. There's probably too many for us to name, and we don't want to be partial to anything. So look up SCAMP, and that's where you'll find those folks.
And earlier in the chat, I saw a question about when we were talking about Measure A, right, which is a sales tax that provides money for affordable housing. Someone asked in the chat, what is taxed? So, and what is exempt? So I looked this up. The tax goods include most retail items, including new clothes, furniture, and taxable services like restaurant meals. It also taxes digital products like software, music, and movies. It exempts unprepared food for human consumption like groceries, prescription medicine, and some medical devices. It also excludes diapers and menstrual hygiene products. So it's designed to have some protections for families, basically.
Thanks for that, Jason.
Yeah, are there any other questions? Also, just a real quick check, maybe put in the thing. Did we overwhelm you? Are you feeling better about housing? Did you feel like you learned more? Do you just maybe just give you more questions? Are you just a little shell shocked right now and you're like, I need to process? I know we covered a lot. And I hope you feel informed. Great. I'm seeing informed, learn more. That's great. I hope you'll come back for future teach-ins. I hope that you'll sign up for our housing group if you haven't yet. And yeah, and just want to say, like, we're always available. I'll put my email in the chat if you want to, if you have more questions, or if you want to schedule like a one-on-one to learn about how you can get more involved with LA Forward, you can reach out to me, and I am totally happy to do meetings or one-on-ones. And yeah, thank you all for being here. We have like 2 minutes. Do we want to play? Oh, Christina, you want to go ahead? So you raised hand.
I'm sorry, this is less of a question and more of a comment. I just really want to give you all your flowers, Jason, Godfrey, Tressa. This was amazing. This helped me a lot. I think people think of me as like a renter expert, but I learned a lot just from coming to this. I can't wait to come to more. I really appreciate LA Forward and all the work you do. Just thank you very much.
Great.
Jason, you want to share who Christina is? Give
So
her
Christina
flowers?
is
Yeah.
works for public counsel, and Christina worked side by side with me on the rent control. We're going to talk more about this at a future teach-in, but last year a group called Keep LA Housed, which is over 100 organizations that work on housing, got the city of LA to change its rent control law for the first time in 40 years, right? So I'm not even 40 years old yet. So this law was older than me, right? And it basically we cut the maximum allowable increase to rent in rent controlled units in half. It was 10% or it was 8%, and we got it cut to 4%. We also got the floor lowered from 3% to 1%. And we removed extra they used to be able to charge you extra percentages if they paid your utilities. We got that removed, and we're still working on getting rid of the full additional occupancy bump, but we got it at least lowered from any additional occupant to now it will cover dependents. So you won't be able to get charged more if like an elderly relative or you have another child, things like that. So yeah, we're going to talk more about that in the future, but all the people who worked on that, congratulations. And yeah, I hope you all learned a lot. I hope you'll come back for the future teach-ins, sign up on the website. And if you haven't signed up yet next week, I'll probably be texting you to invite you. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jason. Tressa had to jump as well. But really excited to catch folks up on all things housing. Come back next Thursday, and we're going to dig into the intersection of climate and housing. Talk soon. Some of you know there's a different LA Forward program starting now, so I'm going to hop over there. Thanks, y'all. Bye.